The thinking model that 100% of successful entrepreneurs, I'm talking the ultra successful, even billionaires, 100% of successful entrepreneurs and billionaires use this thinking model. And in this episode of the Bill Hauser Podcast, we're going to break down exactly what the thinking model is. What actually opened my mind to this and reminded me of the importance of this is I was listening to part of the introduction of the book Principles by Ray Dalio. Ray Dalio, obviously one of the richest people in the world. I believe at one point in time, maybe still today, he built the largest hedge fund. And he talks about in his book Principles, one of these key secrets, this thing that all successful entrepreneurs that I've met use, but it's almost never spoken about because it goes against, this narrative, this belief that somebody else has my answers to my success. And that's true in so many regards. Like, we need mentors, we need consultants, we need people to open us up to new ways and patterns of thinking, right? But if we rely our entire lives on trying to find the right answer to a problem through someone else, we deprive ourselves from coming up with that answer. And so the number one and really the thinking model that is shared across 100% of successful entrepreneurs that I have seen, that I have read about, that I've studied, and even in my own business as well, I've learned through my own development as an entrepreneur, is the art of forming your own decision-making principles. Okay? And what does this mean? It really comes down to, in my mind, if you look at a successful entrepreneur, if you look at a billionaire, they have created their own playbook for success, right? Yes, leaders are readers, right? So I'm not saying that the playbooks that people develop over time is through osmosis. I'm saying that through learning from really smart people and taking a bunch of action and learning through real-time market feedback, over time, the most successful entrepreneurs, they find a way to think for themselves. They find their own pattern of decision-making, their own pattern of making trade-off based decisions on where they're going to invest their time, their money, et cetera, right? And what I think has happened in the social media society is we become so externalized in our thinking, right? We look at what other people have, and sometimes that inspires us to create more for ourselves. So if someone buys a private yacht, some of us will think to ourselves, man, I want a private yacht one day. And that's awesome, right? And we should be motivated by the accomplishments of others, not bitter, not skeptical, not, oh, that person must have ripped someone off. No, we want to be motivated by people's success. We want to allow that to motivate us, right? Similarly, when we hear about something that worked in business, right, we want to learn from that. We want to, especially if that person's in our industry, we want to reach out to them. We want to say, hey, my name's Joe Schmo. I run a company in your same industry. I saw you had this huge win. I'd love to learn more about how you did it, right? Yeah, that's super smart, right? We want to learn through other people's trial and error more than we learn through our own trial and error, because that buys us time, right? If every lesson we learn is through our own trial and error, then we're just going to waste the only asset we never get back in life, and that's our time, right? So we have to learn through the mistakes of others at scale, which you can do through books, through mentors, through consultants, like I said. But at the end of the day, all of this externalized learning, right, which is mission critical to guiding you on the right path when you're an early stage entrepreneur, especially when you're in the startup phase, you need this guidance from external parties to guide your focus, right? And eventually, we have to take everything that we learned and turn it into our own model for decision making, our own model for what success looks like, which ultimately is guided by your values. So the reason I tie this to the book Principles is in the beginning of the book Principles, he talks about the importance of having principles that you rely on as an entrepreneur to be successful, right? And But what he says is, don't listen to my principles. Instead, learn from my principles and use these as motivation to create your own set of inner principles, your own way of thinking, your own way of running your company, right? Which is going to be ultimately based on your values. What are your values? They're your operating behaviors. They're what you look at as tolerated behavior in your life, what you tolerate in terms of results, right? What you value, what you associate value towards is ultimately going to drive your own playbook. And because everyone's a unique human, we all have different perceptions of values, right? So, that opening of the book really opened my mind to this secret that almost no one talks about, because everyone wants to feel like there's some, quick pill that I can take to optimize my life, or there's this just like, hack strategy that I can use to like run successful advertisements online, or blah, 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 blah. And the truth is, success comes from individualism, not copying, right? Copying gets you started so that you can create your own individualized plan and measurements of success. And we can't confuse these two things, right? There's external learning and there's internal learning, and then there's your own internal playbook for success. So when I started learning about this in business, I hired this CEO coach, and this guy is, has run multi-$100 million companies, private equity backing, super, super smart. And he shared with me a story once, because I kept trying to ask him during our coaching calls, how do I manage the company? How do I manage the growth of the company? How do I reach X goal? As though there was some playbook he was going to give me that would be like the model that I'd follow, right? And one day he shared this story, right? He shared a story about Jeff Bezos and how during Jeff Bezos's management meetings at Amazon, when he was the CEO of Amazon, which I believe he's not the CEO anymore, Jeff Bezos would require everyone at the meeting with him to read a printed brief of the agenda of the meeting before the meeting even started, right? So everyone would come into the conference room, and there's multiple different learning styles. Some people write to learn, some people read to learn, some people listen to learn, many different learning styles. Jeff Bezos felt his leadership was communicated best and most efficiently when everyone would come into the office, for a meeting. Let's say they're having like a board meeting or, a strategy meeting, and everyone would come into the office and a printed memo would be put in front of them, and everyone would have to read that memo before the meeting started. So picture 15 of the highest level executives in Amazon all going into a meeting, whereas most people would be chatting. They'd be like, breaking, rapport and like ask about how was your weekend. And instead at Amazon, everyone walks into the office and reads a structured memo before any talking begins, right? And, my coach shares this with me, and says, where have you read about that in a book? And I'm like, well, nowhere really. I've never seen in a book that you must read a memo at the beginning of a meeting in order to run a successful meeting. And then he asked me, where do you think Jeff got this from? I basically was like, well, I guess it's just what works best for him and what works best for Amazon. He was like, right. So what do you think that says about this playbook that you're seeking? I need to create what works best for me and works best for my company, is how I replied, right? And from that point on, I started realizing that if you look at any successful entrepreneur, all of their companies are going to be ran differently, right? Everyone's going to have different definitions of what success looks like in a well-run company, right? Some leaders like to shoot from the hip. I know this one CEO who lives in my local area that I've heard a lot about. I have a member of my team, two of them, who worked directly with this person. This dude's worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, okay? Very successful. And he doesn't even do structured quarterly planning meetings, okay? This guy is shooting from his hip constantly, adjusting strategy constantly, setting unreasonable deadlines every single day, never satisfied with the quality of the work put out. And the dude's built a multi-$100 million net worth. And it's because he's being authentic to himself. A lot of people don't like working for him, right? But it's been sustainable for him as the entrepreneur because it works well for him. And it's his definition of what a successfully ran company looks like based on his values, right? Whereas other people run the more Bezos approach, very structured, right? So it comes down to how, our playbook for success has to be generated internally as a result of lessons we've learned from the pitfalls we've had in business, lessons we've learned from things we tried that did or didn't work, lessons that we've learned through mentors, consultants, coaches. It basically comes from every single thing we've ever learned works or doesn't work, turned into a structured playbook that we can rely on to make our own decisions in our business, right? So this secret is really, in a nutshell, that there is no secret. The secret is the faster you can get to your authentic self in how you run your company and how success looks like to you as an entrepreneur, the faster you can get to your own version of success, the faster you will achieve success, right? And I wish I knew this earlier on because my first, 5 years, 6 years in business, I was basically copying what everyone else told me was successful, right? I read this book called Traction, and the book Traction tells you, how to run your company using L10 meetings. And, I copied it to the T, right? We started our meetings with what's called a segue, and then we transitioned to data review and and it was all structured by the book, right? And that worked for a couple of years until eventually we started breaking the system. We started coming up with our own way of running meetings as a company, right? As to what success looked like for us, right? I remember I learned from the book Think and Grow Rich, the importance of reciting your goals every single day out loud to yourself, right? So I did it every single day. I stated the Think and Grow Rich major definite purpose statement every single day in my kitchen for, call it 5 years, because that's what the book said was the key to success, right? Until eventually I found my own goal setting and reinforcement mechanism that is Bill Hauser's version of how I stay attached to my goals, not Think and Grow Rich's version, which is not my version, right? So anything that's not your version will not be sustainable, right? Anything that you've copied from someone else, eventually you're going to morph into your own way of doing things if you're a successful entrepreneur. If you're not successful, you're going to probably continue copying, and over time, you're going to become a chameleon, and you're never going to really identify your own way of doing things, right? So we have to develop our own way of thinking. I also remember when I started marketing my business, I read all these books on how other people marketed their companies, right? And that was great, right? I learned how to get started with marketing my business. I copied what worked for others. And over time, we started deviating from it when we started finding our own way of marketing our business. You can apply this to your sales model, your marketing model, your management model, your hiring model, how you run quarterly meetings. And the real key, is we find proven methods that have worked through other people's mistakes. We find what worked through others. We study that. We adopt it. We practice it. Once we get to a point of practicing something consistently, we then make it our own. Once we've made it our own, we then make that our status quo way of doing things, right? And then we thank all the mentors, books, programs that taught us how to build it our own way. So the courage to, if I look at our business model as an example, right? The courage to go out and do something your own way actually takes a lot of, how do I put this? Intestinal fortitude, right? Because when you bring something new to the marketplace that hasn't been done before, it can spur a lot of insecurity, right? And it can, because if it hasn't been quote unquote proven before, then you don't have reference experiences to know it's going to work, right? So this is why entrepreneurship is so hard for so many people, and this is why most businesses in the United States and really all countries are service businesses, right? Most companies that exist are not doing something unique, right? They're basically taking a proven practice, like for example, dry cleaning, right? Restaurants, right? And they take a proven business model, right? And they provide a service that is somewhat unique around that business model, not much, right? Think of how many contractors exist, how many roofing companies exist, right? You know there's demand for roofing companies, so it's not really a risk that much to go out and create just another roofing company that's going to compete on experience and quality of material, blah, 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 all the same stuff everyone else competes on, than it is to go out and do something completely different and according to your own playbook of success, right? So, I relate this to our own business, but I also relate it to things like Airbnb, right? When the founder of Airbnb, pitched his idea that you were going to be able to sleep on air mattresses in other people's apartments, strangers' apartments, he was basically laughed out of all of his venture capital meetings for years and years and years until he found like a handful of believers who were like, yeah, I can actually see this being a valid thing, right? This is why in the book Masters of Scale, Reid Hoffman talks about the importance of knowing your no, right? Know all the different types of no's that people can give you around your business idea, right? You have to understand, when people shut down your idea, there's a lot of different ways they can shut down that idea. They can shut it down out of skepticism. They can shut it down out of logic. They can shut it down from subjectiveness, right? There's a lot of ways that people can basically say no to your business idea, right? Airbnb, we look at Uber, right? That you're going to hop into a stranger's car and have them drive you from point A to point B. That was crazy at the time, right? But it was a new business model, right? Organizing all of the world's information in one place, Google, right? That seemed like such a beastly undertaking, right? And it happened, and they did it, right? And, two of the top 10 richest people in the world are the co-owners of that company now. So, in my own business, we are the only company that's ever merged full stack marketing services with, where we're running website, SEO, PPC, social media ads, everything for local lead generation, combined with fractional CFOs, fractional COOs, business coaching, and bookkeeping. And when I first brought these ideas to quote unquote connections, or call it mentors at the time of mine, some of my mentors shut it down. They said, this isn't going to work. You're going to be a jack of all trades. You're going to be a master of none. You really are better off just specializing in one thing. And I trusted my intuition. I trusted my gut that people needed marketing services to generate leads for their business, but then they needed coaching to help them build a world-class sales process. They needed coaching and fractional executives and fractional CFOs to help them dialing their finances and stay profitable as they scale. They need a fractional COO to scale their operations as they scale and build scalable hiring systems. And I look at where our company's at now, and it clearly worked, right? And it's because I followed my own playbook. This is my belief system. And if I'm going to fail, I'd rather fail according to my playbook of what success looks like, rather than what someone else told me success should be, right? Because you'll never win trying to live up to the expectations of others, because they're not you, right? Only you can set your own expectations of success. So I would venture to guess, if you were to look at 100 of the most successful, I'm not guessing, I know this as a fact. If you look at 100 of the most successful people that come to your mind, or that you look at on the Forbes billionaire list, or the most successful entrepreneurs in your local market, and you were to compare 100 of them, you're going to realize there are baseline principles that they are doing that are all common denominators, fundamental baseline truths. They're probably all setting goals for their business. They're probably communicating goals for their business in a certain way, right? They're probably adjusting their strategy based on new information that presents itself, every now and then throughout the year. There probably are baseline principles that all of them are following, right? They're probably taking a certain level of risk, right? They're probably delegating at a certain level, right? And it wouldn't be like, oh, new groundbreaking, we found out this entrepreneur is setting goals, right? No, okay? Like the common denominators of success are going to be present in all of those 100 people for a certain set of variables, right? But then the question is, how do they set goals? How do they communicate goals? How do they execute on their strategic objectives in their business? How do they execute, right? How do they get stuff done? And I would venture to guess, I would be quite certain to say that if you inspect all those 100 businesses, while the principles they operate on are almost identical, the way they get things done is going to be very, very different. I once heard someone say, culture is the way you get shit done, right? It's the way we operate, right? Anyone can set a goal. Anyone can communicate a goal. The culture of a business is ultimately a reflection of the owner's belief system in how we want to get stuff done, right? How quick we move, how much risk we take, how perfect plans need to be before we take action on them, blah, 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 blah. How we communicate change, how we take action, right? And I look at this like in my own life. Like there was a point in my life where, my version of success was two things. It was racing dirt bikes and it was running the company S&B team, right? And I went all in on that, right? Because that was based on my phase in life at that point in time, that was everything I wanted to do, right? Run my company and race dirt bikes. Now I'm not racing dirt bikes anymore, right? I moved on because my viewpoint around racing dirt bikes changed, right? So I haven't touched a dirt bike in months and months and months because my viewpoint changed. So some people that I used to race dirt bikes with have asked me like, what happened, Bill? You kind of just went dark on us, right? And the truth is, I feel bad about it because I do have some close connections in the sport. The sport is just too dangerous for me to do now. It's too much of a time commitment. It's too risky from a physical health perspective. My health is so dialed in right now, I cannot risk it. I have too many other responsibilities. So if I was going by their playbook of success, it would be, all right, I'll still ride just so I can, not make everyone feel bad about me stopping riding. But no, my internal playbook of success changed and cold turkey, completely cut it out after, multiple years of getting back into the sport and riding multiple days a week, getting into the, racing shape that I was in, and stopped cold turkey because my internal value system changed and I wasn't criticizing myself about that, right? And, I believe that, how we make course corrections in our life and business should directly stem from our decision-making lens and our values, right? And as our values change, our way of getting things done change. As our way of getting things done changes, ultimately our playbook changes, right? And, think about the best-selling books of all time, right? They're usually based on unique, original concepts, right? Where do unique and original concepts come from? You being your authentic self, right? It's very rare you're going to see a book that's that's successful, that's regurgitated information from someone else, right? You're usually going to see someone living their authentic truth reflected in that book, right? So if the most successful books and the most successful entrepreneurs are all rooted in authenticity around your definition of success, this is the one secret that all successful entrepreneurs, billionaires, people who are achieving more than you and I are in our lives, they are following more of their own playbook than you. It's not that they're following a better playbook so much as they're following their own playbook. And they've found a way to amalgamate and cultivate and capture information from other people who are successful and make it their own, right? Good artists copy, great artists steal, right? Pablo Picasso once said. That's true. We have to steal to come up with the raw materials to create our art, right? We'd be stupid to not look at what worked in other pieces of art or things we liked from other pieces of art, right? But eventually we have to make it our own. Look at any of Pablo Picasso's work, and it is authentically him, okay? He says good artists copy, great artists steal, but what he meant was I get inspired by looking at what other people created and I make it my own, right? And I innovate based on the context of principles of things that worked in the past, but I don't do it from a state of, necessarily just copying what other people do, right? I do it from a state of learning from what other people do and then making it my own playbook, making it my own system. So my invitation is, how can you and I form better ways of creating original thinking patterns and an original method through which we accomplish our goals in our life that aligns with our values, not somebody else's values. And that is the secret that nobody talks about. And I believe if you and I can implement this one secret more in our lives and business, we stop criticizing ourselves, we start being our authentic self more, we stop apologizing for it, and then we start seeing more success because now we're operating authentically. We're operating in line with what we want, not with what somebody else wants, not what somebody else thinks is successful, but we're operating from a lens of purity, right? I want this. I want to accomplish it this way. This is how this aligns with my gifts. This is my definition of success. Go, 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 right? Let other people study you. Let other people read about you and your unique way that you did things, right? Because you got so good at doing things your own way that people go, whoa, we've got to study how this person did things because it's so unique. So I hope you got value from this episode of the Bill Hauser Podcast, and I will see you in the next episode.